some of you come in later, you may not have a copy of the paper. I'll give more to Cheryl. Raise your hand, and Cheryl will take them to you. It's wonderful to have the students there. Okay, there's a reason for this. I learned a long time ago that it's easier for me to talk about a paper than to read it. So I'm going to kind of just go through some of the points, and some of them Gary gone over before.
Mic a little closer.
I'll move closer to the mic. Well, I'll move. Yeah, I'll be right here. Okay, the paper begins with. Now, this doesn't follow chronological order. This follows how the information, let's say, became available. And much of it became available due to the Assassination Record Review Board's work. The first thing is this letter to Lyndon Johnson. By the way, it was in hand, not typed as it is here, but from Alma Cole to President Johnson. Now, what's interesting is that the letter is dated December 11th. The FBI got it on December 19th, and on December 20th they were sending people to North Dakota. They took this a little bit seriously. Again, Gary mentioned William Timmer. He's a person who his mother said was a friend of Lee Harvey Oswald. There's several other interviews that are listed there, and I'm not going to go over them now. There is, that's one of the reasons I give it to you to read, but there are some interesting points. We interviewed in Stanley both the former editor of the paper and the former state's attorney, who were the editor and state's attorney at the time of this, rather 1953, when supposedly Oswald was there. They both claimed there's no way the FBI would have ever come into Stanley, North Dakota without them knowing about it. And since they didn't know about it, the FBI wasn't there. Now, we went in saying we've read these FBI reports. I had them in my briefcase, but I thought, if they're not going to believe it, they're not going to believe it. Or maybe they don't want to believe it. They said the people that they interviewed were too good of friends of ours for them not to ever tell us. And I thought that was very interesting. Anyway, we did those interviews, and in the process of doing that, we ran into this, I guess, situation where we interviewed this Lyle Abel. He was kind of interesting. We were introduced to him one weekend. I talked to him on the phone at length during the week, and then we interviewed him the following weekend again. And the second time, Gary and I, and actually my wife Julie, videotaped him in an interview. Between the two interviews where we saw him face to face, I sent him a bunch of photographs. And I interviewed him on the phone, going over the photographs, which ones he recognized. And then I did the whole process again on videotape. When it was all done, almost as we're saying goodbye, he said, "Who is that guy anyway?" And it just struck me. He has no idea who Lee Harvey Oswald was. And he said, "Well, I didn't pay much attention at the time of the assassination." But he had a very interesting story to tell. The person that he saw, and I'm not at all sure that this was anyone other than a southern boy named Lee, and maybe not even named Lee, but still, it was a very interesting story. He was told that he was trying to recruit some guys to go to Mexico to join Castro to go back to Cuba. And at the time, Castro was in fact in Mexico training people to go to Cuba. My own sense of that was Castro wouldn't possibly have been interested in 3 young, white, gringo boys that didn't even speak Spanish to go with him to Cuba, but that's quite another thing, I guess. One of the things about Oswald that, another thing about North Dakota that is involved here is that Timmer didn't refer to him as Lee Harvey Oswald. He referred to him as Harvey or Harv Oswald. The name Lee never came up. There's a researcher by the name of John Armstrong who has written the book Lee and Harvey and Lee, where the first time the name Harvey Oswald was ever used was in North Dakota. So that's very interesting. Anyhow, one of the things that was also interesting to me and interesting to a lot of people, including there's been a recent article in JFK Politics Quarterly by Walt Brown on Walt spent, I think he spent a year trying to learn Russian well enough to speak it. He actually even married a Russian woman, but he said, I could never learn to speak that language that quickly. Well, there's no place that Oswald would have become, if he were American-born and never sent to language school and spent a lot of time, would have ever become fluent in Russian. If you've heard well-educated non-English speakers, they don't speak fluent English with even a particular dialect of English. There are some, but they've often been trained from the time they were a very young child. But Oswald's ability in Russian was George, I may never say that right, George D., who had introduced Oswald to the Russian community in Dallas, said that he spoke perfect Russian with a particular dialect, and yet the only indication Oswald ever studied Russian was he supposedly took a course in the service, or just kind of a correspondence course, which he didn't pass. He went to Russia for 2.5 years, and there's no indication at any time he ever spoke a word of Russian. Yet he comes back to the United States, and he's a proficient Russian speaker. Now that's interesting. Okay. If on page 8 there's a thing about Oswald and the customs agent. Now, this is a story that it's interesting. There's a Judith Baker, whom some would say, well, who would believe what she had to say? Well, what she had to say was really very interesting, because Judith Baker did not believe Oswald was not native born. Yet she knew that he was very proficient in Russian, but more to the point, in June 24th, 1963, a customs agent was sent to New Orleans, and anybody who was trying to get a passport on the 24th, which included Oswald, got it on the 25th. Now, they might have been more efficient back then, but for those of you who tried to apply for a passport and got it in even 6 weeks, you probably think you're lucky. And today, it's much longer than that. Well, he got it the next day. But what's really interesting is the agent. The agent was flown in for 1 day and 1 day only. And it happens to be an agent who, the first time Oswald ran into him, was crossing the border to Canada by the Niagara Falls. And here's the story that Judith heard